The odometer rolled past 187,000 somewhere between a red light and a left turn. You've made enough times your hands finish it before your brain does. The number sat on the dash like any other Tuesday.
No one clapped.
A school bus pulled out in front of you, you braked, and the moment passed. But you kept thinking about it. 187,000 miles.
15 years.
You did the math once, late at night the way you do math when you shouldn't be awake. About 12,467 miles a year. The equivalent of circling the Earth 7.5 times. At some point in the last decade and a half, the car stopped being transportation and became something else, a record of decisions, a physical ledger of a life pointed in a particular direction. The direction was never the one most people were heading. You bought it used. 2009, a silver sedan with 34,000 miles and a small scuff on the rear quarter panel the previous owner mostly buffed out. $11,400 cash.
You were 27.
Your friend Derek had just leased a new truck with a panoramic sunroof, heated seats, and a payment that matched what some people paid in rent. He was proud of it in a visible way, the kind where he'd glance at the truck mid-conversation in a parking lot, as though checking it was still there. You drove your sedan home and parked it next to a dumpster because that was the only open spot, went upstairs, and felt something you couldn't name at the time. Not doubt, exactly. Something smaller and more specific. It was the first moment you understood that the car you chose and the car Derek chose weren't really about transportation. They were about identity. Which version of yourself you wanted the outside world to see first. Derek had answered that question one way. You had answered it another, almost without realizing you'd been asked. The first year, people asked about the car the way people do when they're asking something else. A woman you'd been seeing for 3 months looked at it in a restaurant parking lot and said, without any particular edge, "Oh, I didn't realize that was yours." You nodded and didn't explain. There was nothing to explain. It started every morning, got 32 miles to the gallon, and had a back seat wide enough to haul a full-sized shelf unit from a furniture store. What were you supposed to apologize for? Your father had opinions. He grew up watching men of a certain standing drive cars that announced that standing, and some of that had stayed in him the way things stay when they're absorbed young and never examined. He said nothing directly, which was worse. Just that particular silence when you pulled into the driveway at Thanksgiving. For about 18 months you felt the gap between the car and what the world expected. Felt it in parking lots and at work events, the way you feel a tag still on a shirt you forgot to cut off. Not painful, just present. Then you stopped feeling it. Not because you convinced yourself of anything. Not because you read the right book. Just because one morning you opened a spreadsheet and ran the numbers the way you ran any other numbers you cared about, and the numbers said something clear. The average new car the year you bought your sedan cost about $28,000. The average monthly payment on that loan ran around $480 over 5 years. Interest alone added several thousand on top. Then depreciation. Most new cars lose 15 to 20% of their value the moment they leave the lot, and by year 5 they're worth roughly 40% of what was paid. Comprehensive insurance on a new financed vehicle ran significantly higher than liability on a paid-off used one. 15 years of avoided payments. 15 years of lower premiums. 15 years of that money going somewhere else instead, a brokerage account, a duplex at 31, index funds that sat accumulating so quietly you sometimes forgot to check them for months. The approximate cumulative savings across 15 years came to around $86,400, before accounting for what those dollars compounded into once they were deployed somewhere that actually grew. The car wasn't the whole story. But it was never not part of it. There's a specific kind of conversation that happens when you keep a car for a long time. People stop asking about it after a while. The car becomes invisible, which turned out to be the point. Status is expensive in ways that don't show up on any bill. When you drove a car that announced something, some portion of every interaction went toward managing the announcement, defending it or inhabiting it or watching people quietly recalibrate their read of you based on it. That energy is real even when it's invisible. It has weight. When you drove a car that said nothing, people stopped looking at the car. They had to look at you. They had to talk to you to figure out what you were. That shift changed the quality of almost every relationship that followed. The people who stayed through the transition turned out to be worth keeping.
Year 4. The alternator went.
You pulled into a parking structure on a Wednesday afternoon with the battery warning light doing its quiet, insistent thing.
Tow, $95.
Alternator replacement at an independent shop, $340, parts and labor. 2 days without the car, handled with public transit and a schedule adjustment that was mildly inconvenient and genuinely fine. Total cost of the crisis, $435. Derek, by that point, was on his second leased vehicle and had just absorbed an $1,100 repair bill that wasn't covered because of how the lease terms handled pre-existing wear. He mentioned it with the resigned humor people use when something has cost them money they don't have a good container for. You said you were sorry and meant it. You didn't mention the alternator. It wasn't a competition, just a number sitting quietly next to another number.
Year 7.
Your neighbor Tom is a good man. He coaches youth sports on weekends, keeps his driveway immaculate, and has a particular relationship with his vehicles. He takes pride in them the way some people take pride in a yard or a kitchen, as something internal expressed outward. He cycles through cars every few years, always something recent and substantial, and you've never begrudged him any of it. One Saturday morning at the edge of your driveways, he asked whether you'd thought about getting something newer. Genuinely curious, no angle. You told him the car had 112,000 miles on it, that you expected another 80,000 with proper maintenance, and that by your math you were averaging just over $760 a year in total vehicle costs including insurance and maintenance. Roughly what some people paid in a single month. He looked at the car, then back at you.
Ha. Just ha.
But a thoughtful one, the kind that means a person is running a calculation they hadn't run before. Year 9, and there's a moment you come back to more than most. You're sitting in the car outside a meeting that ran 2 hours too long. Early evening. The street outside is that particular shade of blue that late autumn makes when the light drops fast. You're tired in a way that sits behind your eyes rather than in your muscles. The car is warm. The seat is shaped to you now in the way that only years of the same body in the same position produces. The steering wheel has a worn spot at 10 o'clock where your left thumb rests on long drives. The driver's side cup holder has a faint ring stain from a travel mug you used every morning for 2 years before the lid finally cracked. You sit in it and feel something you recognize but can't fully name. It's the feeling of a thing that has been with you long enough to know you, not in any sentimental way, just the simple physical fact that this object has been present for more of your adult life than most of the people you know. It was there the morning you got the job offer that changed everything. It was in the hospital parking structure the night your sister's first child was born. It sat outside your apartment the year everything fell apart and then outside the next apartment while things were quietly being rebuilt. The car didn't witness any of that the way a person does. It just existed through all of it. Somehow that's its own kind of record.
Year 11.
A colleague named Stephen marks a new position downtown with a new car. European, dark navy, the kind of vehicle with a specific weight when a door closes. He parks it in a different spot every day for the first week, as though he hasn't settled on the right relationship to it yet. He asks what you drive and you tell him. You watch the brief recalibration behind his eyes, the adjustment of the picture he had of you to accommodate this new information. You've watched it happen enough times to recognize every stage. That's smart actually, he says. What that means is, that's not what I expected. What it means is, I had a category for you and this car doesn't fit it and I'm standing here not knowing what to do with it. You smile and change the subject. Stephen's car will be worth substantially less in 3 years. Yours will start every morning and need nothing but oil and tires and the occasional minor repair. The gap between those two trajectories will widen while Stephen mentions the car at lunches you both attend and you say nothing at all. Year 13, and something shifts the way weather shifts, not all at once, but through accumulation. The people your age who spent their 30s cycling through vehicles, upgrading apartments, building a life assembled to look a certain way from the outside are now having different conversations.
About costs.
About the exhaustion of maintaining a lifestyle designed to impress rather than sustain. Derek calls on a Thursday. He's considering downsizing his vehicle situation. The lease on the current truck ends in 4 months and he's running the numbers for the first time, really running them, not just looking at the monthly payment and deciding it's manageable. He sounds like someone who has found something that was always true but never visible before. You listen without saying much. You don't tell him about the duplex or the index funds or the compounding that's been happening quietly behind a life that looks ordinary from the driveway. You just tell him the math makes sense, and that an independent mechanic is worth finding before anything breaks, not after.
He says he appreciates it.
You mean it when you say you're glad he called. Year 15 starts the same way every other year did.
The car outside.
The engine turning over on the first try on a cold January morning, the way it has every cold January morning for a decade and a half. Heat up within 2 minutes. The familiar smell of old upholstery and the particular dust that settles in vents over a long life of use.
Not unpleasant.
Just specific. The smell of something used consistently and maintained honestly. You sit in the driveway for a moment before backing out, no particular reason, just a pause. 187,000 miles.
15 years. 1 car.
You think about what the alternative would have looked like, not with regret but with genuine curiosity, the way you examine a road you didn't take not because you wish you had but because the geometry is interesting. If you'd bought new at 27 and cycled every 5 years the way most people do, you'd be on your third vehicle now. Total spend across purchase prices, financing, depreciation, and higher insurance would have landed somewhere between $90,000 and $130,000 above what you actually spent, depending on models and terms. That distance is sitting in accounts that have been compounding since your early 30s. Not a dramatic number, not the kind that makes anyone gasp, but real. It arrived without a single sacrifice that actually hurt, through the repeated choice to let a machine do its job rather than perform a role. There's a man at a professional event in February. He arrived in something low, fast, and very new. You watched from the lobby window before going in. The way he stepped out, straightened his jacket, glanced back at it once before coming through the door. Inside, he mentions the car within the first 10 minutes. Not aggressively, just naturally, the way people mention things when those things are doing work for them in a room. He asks what you drive.
You tell him.
The silver sedan, 2009, 15 years on it.
He makes the face. You know the face.
You've been collecting it for 15 years and have never once been bothered by it. You don't want something newer? You tell him the truth. The car does everything a car is supposed to do, and the money that isn't going toward a replacement is doing things that matter more, and you've never found a good argument against that logic under any real examination. He nods like he's filing it somewhere he might look at later or might not. You get a glass of water, talk to 2 people you actually came to see, and leave at a reasonable hour. In the parking structure, the silver sedan sits between a newer SUV and a truck with a fresh dealer plate. It looks exactly like what it is, a well-maintained, unpretentious machine that has been asked to do one job and has done it without complaint for 15 years.
You get in. It starts.
You pull out and merge onto the road home. Somewhere on the highway, with a familiar vibration of the wheel and the hum of tires at speed you'd recognize in a room full of sounds, something becomes clear that you've only understood in pieces before. The car was never the point.
It was the proof.
Proof of what exactly? That the gap between what something needs to be and what most people make it be is almost always larger than anyone admits. That consistency, maintained quietly over a long enough period, produces outcomes that no single dramatic decision could replicate. That choosing to not perform something is its own kind of position, not a passive one, not an accidental one, but a deliberate orientation toward what actually works rather than what reads well from the outside. The odometer will cross 190,000 before summer. The mechanic says the engine has more life in it, provided the maintenance schedule holds. There's a small rust spot near the rear wheel well you've been watching for 2 years, monitoring rather than panicking, the same way you approach most things that are aging but not failing. You'll fix it when it needs fixing.
Not before.
Not for appearances. The road home is the same road it's always been. The car knows it the way you know it, not because roads can be known, but because 15 years of the same commute at the same early hour has worn a groove in you that feels less like habit and more like identity. Some people are what they drive. You've met enough of them to understand the appeal. You're just someone who drives a car that works, puts the difference somewhere it grows, and has been doing that long enough that the difference has become something worth having. The exit ramp curves left. The car follows without being asked. You're already thinking about something else.